Shira Gura, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's really good to have you on the show here. And you're all the way in Israel, uh, and fortunately we have a good connection now. If something happens, we'll just reconnect, okay? But
Sounds good.
yeah, that sounds good. And I understand you are originally from the U.S., but now you're living there in Israel. And where
Right.
did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in southern New Jersey, in Cherry Hill.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm glad that we're able to communicate, and I'm eager to talk to you about your book, Getting Unstuck. Unstuck. 5 simple steps for emotional well-being. And I have a copy of the book right here, which I will hold up for all of our YouTube viewers. Not too thick, high quality paperback. So will be the kind of the focus of our discussion this morning. And first of all, I want to ask you, well, what do you mean by stuck?
So stuck is a situation where you are strongly attached to a certain emotion or emotions, and you can't see any other way of being or behaving in that space. And you're basically blocked from recognizing anything else in the realm of possibility in terms of how you can otherwise behave or react to the situation. So oftentimes we get stuck on anger or disappointment or frustration or fear or guilt or shame. And when we get stuck on those emotions, we almost kind of close off, like we don't see any other alternative way of being.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. So, what are some examples of being stuck? And by the way, maybe these ideas came from your own life. I don't know, but I like to get down and personal. So, if you've got some
yeah.
examples,
Oh,
from your own life.
I do. I have my entire book is personal examples, and my podcast, every week I share a personal example. I am
Oh,
very
good.
vulnerable and very honest, and I have no shame in sharing my stuck spots. I get stuck easily, and I think most people get stuck easily multiple times a day. Most people probably don't recognize it, but I do. I'm very aware, and which is why I'm able to get myself unstuck. But sure, I can give you a recent example. I went
Great.
camping this past weekend with my family and another family, and it was Friday afternoon, and it was about time to get the fire going. And at the same time, there were also kids. So the other mom and I took the kids down to the beach so that the husbands could start to get the fire going. And what I noticed was the husband of my friend was getting the fire going, and my husband was laying inside the tent taking a nap. And I got very stuck on disappointment and frustration and embarrassment. I
That he
said,
wasn't there helping out and pitching in.
"Yeah." I
Yeah.
said, "Are you planning to help?" And he said, "No, I'm planning to rest. And if they need me, they'll call me."
Uh-huh.
And I got really stuck. I
Yeah.
got really,
Yeah.
I got like that's just like a simple, maybe it's a silly example, but it's like these
Not at
just
all.
mundane interactions that we have with other people, and also sometimes we get stuck on things with ourselves. But that was just a recent example that
Yeah.
came to mind.
Just describing being out with another family camping, it seems to me, for me, that would be a ripe situation for many ways of getting stuck.
Oh,
Because,
absolutely.
you're blending with another family and they've got their way of being and you've got your way of being. And now
Yeah,
you're trying to mesh the two. And yeah,
it,
it's
it's so true.
they're
But the truth of the
challenging.
matter is, I mean, it's true what you're saying, but at the same time, it could be also that could be an easy excuse, because I don't need another family to like I could get stuck easily without that other family in the picture. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the
Right.
opportunities for getting stuck are abundant. They're all over the place. If you are alive and you are human, you're going to get stuck no matter you're with another family or you're just with your partner who you live with 24/7.
Right.
Yeah.
How long have you 2 been living together, by the way? How long have you been married?
Yesterday, we celebrated 18 years.
Oh, wow, you look so young. I've congratulations. And you
Thank
have
you.
kids, right? 1 or
We
more?
have 4 kids. Yeah, ages, the
Okay.
oldest is 17 and the youngest is 8.
Yeah, great. Well, I have 4 adult kids, so I can tell you the time does pass, and you'll all get through it. And end
Yeah.
up being very proud, as I am, of my kids. One just graduated from law school this past weekend, and so that was
Mm,
a very proud thing for us. So,
congratulations.
without getting into the details now, but from the 20,000-foot view, uh, how would you describe the stuck method?
I would describe the stuck method as a simple, easy to remember, step-by-step process that helps people and guides people from a stuck place to a place of calm, clarity, and relief and freedom.
Okay, well, good. And actually, stuck is an acronym. I think that's what you would call it. So,
Yes?
expand that for us if you would.
Sure. So I don't know how much in detail you want. I offer, workshops that can be 2 hours on just explaining the theory behind it. Um, but I can walk you. Do you want me to walk you through the steps?
Yeah, we're going to get into, yeah, why not? Why not? If that's what's coming
Okay.
up, let's do it, but not for two
Okay.
hours. Maybe
Okay. Not for
only,
2 hours. Cliff
yeah,
notes.
yeah.
Okay. So S represents stop. And that is where you take a pause and you redirect your attention to something in the present moment, just noticing what you're feeling, noticing what you are thinking, rather than staying attached to the story.
Yeah.
So
Now,
it
let me just jump in here and say that so the first letter is stop of stuck, S for stop. And I think that's a huge thing. The big topic these days is mindfulness and just being aware in the moment. That's a big thing of being able to catch yourself instead of being so in it
yeah,
that you don't notice, right?
yeah. I mean, this is the most difficult step I think, of the 5
Yeah.
steps. Awareness. It's not only awareness, it's awareness and taking responsibility to stop. Because
Uh-huh.
most likely, if you're in this stuck situation with somebody else and they are not practicing to get unstuck in their life, most likely they are not going to take a stop. And somebody needs to take a stop in order to, in order to end the conflict and suffering.
Yeah.
And it's not
Yeah.
easy to stop. It's not natural. Our brains go. We're just constantly on go mode, and so
Right.
we're not used to stopping. We don't. Most people don't
Yeah.
have a practice of taking frequent stops during the day and pausing from what they're doing. So it's not easy. So I call it the 5 simple steps to emotional well-being, not the 5 easy steps.
Ah. Okay. Okay. And the next letter is T.
So T is for tell. This is where you identify which emotion or which emotions you are stuck on. And so, for example, the situation that I had with my husband, I was really disappointed. I was also maybe angry. I was probably also a little embarrassed. And so when I was getting myself unstuck, I was recognizing those emotions. But it's really important to name your emotion in a certain way, because when I say I'm angry or I'm frustrated or I'm embarrassed, I'm identifying with that emotion. It's kind of like I'm saying I'm Shira, I'm angry. Right? Shira and anger are like one and the same. But of
Uh-huh.
course, I'm not angry all of the time. I'm not an angry person. I'm just in that moment I happen to be angry. And so rather than saying I'm angry, I say I'm stuck on anger. I'm stuck on disappointment. I'm stuck on embarrassment. And just like I can be stuck on it, I can also get unstuck from it. And so,
Okay.
T, you're identifying the emotions and you're allowing yourself to feel whatever comes up. Because most of the time, when we have difficult emotions that arise in our body, what we tend to do is resist them because they're uncomfortable. So we tend to not want to, feel that emotion. And so in this step, you allow yourself to feel whatever arises.
So it's noticing, but without huge judgment and
Right,
huge self condemnation, but just saying,
right.
okay, this is what's going on for me right now.
Hmm. Yep.
Okay. And you,
So
the
you
letter
represent.
U.
The letter U represents uncover. This is where we identify our thoughts, what caused us to feel those emotions, because thoughts create emotions. So, why was I feeling embarrassed? Why was I feeling angry?
Mhm.
Why was I feeling disappointed? And I uncover what was going on. What was going on in that moment that I felt stuck? And similar to the T step, I recommend people use a certain language. You start with the words I believe. For
Ah,
instance, I would say, I believe um, my husband should be helping, right? That's a thought that I have. I believe he should be helping.
yeah,
And I recommend you use the word I believe because it offers a chance to recognize that it's not necessarily a fact, right? But it's a belief, right? It's we can check it, we can investigate
yeah,
that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so the second part of this step is actually not only uncovering, but it's also investigating. It's asking yourself, is that entirely true? Like,
Uh-huh.
do I know for sure that's entirely true that he should be helping?
Could a part
And
of it also be of the uncovering is realizing that you're being triggered by something in your past is being triggered by what's going on now?
sure, it could be a thought, it could be a memory of something that came from your past. Like, I believe, you know, I don't know, my parents told me in my past that this is the way people should act. It could be something from my past for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. And so in my
Okay.
situation, like when I was getting myself unstuck from that, I was saying to myself, that he should be, I was adamant, he should be helping. There's no other way about it. Of course he should be helping. But when I stopped and I uncovered that and I asked myself, is that 100% true? I said to myself, you know what? Well, first of all, he's not helping. So how do I know what he should be doing if that's not that's not reality? So like that's not what's happening. So how do I know what should be happening if that's
Yeah.
not what's happening?
Well, the
And
word should has a lot of loading on it, and
yeah, 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 yeah. And I said to myself, maybe he shouldn't be helping. He's not helping. He's not helping, so maybe he shouldn't be helping. That's what
right,
reality is right now. I'm
yeah,
just accepting what
right,
reality is.
yeah. Okay, and so now we're on to C. STUC.
Mhm. So C represents consider, and this is where we start to expand our minds and recognize what else is in the realm of possibility. So the moment that you recognize that a thought that you had in the uncover step isn't 100% true, this is where you really have an opportunity to recognize what else might be possible. And so I considered, well, maybe that the other husband, if he needs help, he'll ask. I considered that. I considered maybe the other husband doesn't even need help. I considered
Yeah,
that. Maybe he doesn't need help. He's doing fine by himself. I considered my husband had a really hard day and he has a headache, and it's okay if he rests for 15 minutes. Like nothing's going to happen. I consider that my husband is a really great guy. He's a great father. He's a great husband. He's very responsible. And he needs a break. And this is not how he usually
mhm,
acts. Like
yeah,
all of a sudden I came up with this list of, other alternative perspectives.
yeah. Good for you. Okay, STUCK. Tell us about K.
Right.
This was
So
a little bit of a stretch.
this way, right. Well, it was hard for me to find a good word that started with the letter K. But
Right.
so getting unstuck is happens in the C step, right? When I consider a new perspective and I take it on, it creates a new emotion. I'm feeling better. I'm unstuck. I'm like ready to go back out into the world. But the process really doesn't end until the K step. And the K represents okay, which is self compassion. So oftentimes when we get stuck, we we hold ourselves in we get hurt, we feel shame, we feel embarrassed, we feel resentment even towards ourselves that we got stuck in the first place. You know, because oftentimes we can get stuck and then that could that could lead to like a whole blow up or a fight or and then we can look at ourselves and realize, well, that was our fault because we were the ones that started it. And so this last step offers you that opportunity to close the process and wrap it
Yeah.
up with a place of saying, I got stuck and it's okay and I'm human and that's what happens when you're a human, you
Right.
get stuck and
Yeah.
I forgive myself.
So, how did you come to develop the stuck method? You implied in something you said earlier that there was a lot of theory behind it that you can take hours to expound on. So, how did this come
Yeah.
about?
So when I moved to Israel in 2009 with my husband and 3 kids at the time, I
Wow.
started to write letters to my family. I was just updating them once a week about what was going on and difficult places and that were happening and the whole transition and learning a new language and jobs and the kids transitioning. Like it was a really difficult time. And I realized very soon that rather than writing one letter to my parents and one letter to my sister and one letter to my grandmother, I could just write one letter to everybody. And then I learned about the concept of blog. I didn't even know what a blog was at the time. And I realized I could create a blog and just put it up there and send them the link.
Uh, yeah.
And so I called the blog Stuck in the Muck 365 because I found myself getting stuck pretty often. And I wrote a story a week. Every single week I wrote a
Mm,
personal story of where I was getting stuck.
yeah.
But what was interesting that, I studied psychology in school, and I have a graduate degree in occupational therapy with a focus in mental health. And I practice mindfulness meditation. I'm a yoga instructor, and I have all this knowledge of you would think that I would be able to get unstuck with all of that knowledge and
Yeah.
education,
Yeah.
and yet and yet I couldn't. And so I was writing these stories just basically saying like I'm stuck and I just I didn't I didn't have a way to get out. I didn't have a tool that I could depend upon on with every single story to move me from stuck to unstuck. And so over a period of like 2 or 3 years of blogging every single week, I recognized that I needed a tool, and I was using the word stuck anyway. It was in the
Uh,
title of the blog, and it was in every single
yeah.
story. And I realized that I could take that word and turn it into a tool.
Excellent. You said stuck in the muck. Stuck what?
I called
Is
it
that
Stuck in the
what?
Muck
In
365. Yeah, it
in the
doesn't
muck.
exist anymore.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Great. And you're careful to say that stuck is a method and not a cure. Uh, not a cure, but a set of tools. You say. So expand on that a little bit. Not a
Right. This
cure.
this is right. This is not a, one stop thing that you take a magic pill and you're like, I'm unstuck for the rest of my life. It's not really about that. It's not really about even knowledge. You do need to acquire the tool if you want to use it in your life, but what it really is, it's a practice. It's a practice. For me, it's like when you wake up in the morning and you brush your teeth to clean out your mouth and take a shower to clean off your body. For me, it's doing this work of getting unstuck is like cleaning out my brain, cleaning out my
Uh-huh.
mind. I wake up often and I already first thing in the morning, I feel like I have a lot of garbage in my mind, whether it's anxiety or um, a conversation I had yesterday that I didn't resolve yet, and it's still on my mind. And so for me, this is like a lifestyle tool.
Hmm.
um, it's not a cure.
Wow.
Just because I know it and just because I developed it doesn't mean that I don't get stuck in my life. I still get
Yeah.
stuck, but at least now I'm armed. At least
Yeah.
now, anytime I get stuck, I know what to do. I go right to that method, and within seconds at this point, I can get myself unstuck.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So you list seven emotions that we tend to get stuck on or in. And the first is fear. So let's explore each of these in a little bit of detail. So, talk to us as if we don't know fear. Talk to
Mm.
us a bit about fear.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a story that I wrote in the book around fear. I think it actually had to, well, there was each emotion inside my book has 6 or 7 personal stories. So I think one of them had to do with the recent terrorist attacks that were going on in Israel at the time that I was
Oh,
writing the
wow.
book.
Yeah.
So when I was younger and I visited Israel and I was in my like early 20s, the way of terrorism was bus bombings. And so
Yeah.
like your rational mind was like, well, if you avoided buses, then you're safe, that kind of thing. But now the terrorism is kind of, it's shifted. It's not really bus bombings. Now it's just random acts of, people having kitchen knives and, kitchen scissors and, happening in the supermarket or happening, it could be at a bus stop or happening
Mm.
anywhere, like anywhere. And there was like this sudden um, like flood of terrorist attacks when I was writing the book, and I wrote that as one of my stories that I was just stuck on it, and I just didn't want to leave my house. I mean, I literally
Yeah.
didn't want to. I didn't have to leave my house because I was working from the house, but I didn't even want to go to the house, leave, go to the supermarket. I didn't want to go anywhere.
Well,
I was
this
so stuck
doesn't
on
sound,
fear.
yeah, this doesn't sound like an irrational fear. So how do you work through that? That's,
Yeah,
that's a very
yeah,
dramatic
yeah.
example.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, but at the same time, it is kind of irrational because the chances of something happening to me um, are so slim. The chances of me getting into a car accident in Israel is about 1,000,000 times higher than
Right.
me dying, from a terrorist attack. So, so basically, that was the work I did of stopping, pausing, identifying the fear, uncovering, I believe I'm gonna die if I leave my house. I believe I'm gonna get into a terrorist attack. Well, that's not 100% true. I have no idea what's gonna happen in my life,
Right.
and I can consider I'm gonna miss a lot if I don't leave my house. If I just stay
Yeah.
stuck in my house all the time, I'm gonna miss a heck of a lot of what's going on in the world. And I
That would
can
be literally
consider
stuck. Yeah.
literally stuck, yeah, literally stuck in the
Mhm.
house. And so that's what got me through it. Just,
I assume
yeah.
with particularly with this example, and maybe with the other emotions as well, uh, as you say, it's not a cure. And I would think this is not a one-time thing that you do this process. You probably have to do it pretty frequently.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. I say it's like a tool that you need to acquire for your toolbox.
Yeah.
You can't just learn it once and then you have it. And I literally, I use this at least once a day, if not 3 to 4 to 5
Well,
times a day.
I meant particularly
And
in relation to the fear, to a given emotion, in this case, fear, because there is a subjective part of it of danger. And so I would assume you need to refresh that
yeah,
process. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the more you do it, the more you take a new path of thinking and you develop new neural networks of thinking in a different way, the easier that way of thinking comes.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
access those considerations a lot quicker. It's like, oh yeah, I can consider that, nothing, most likely nothing is going to happen to me. Like you,
Yeah.
you don't have to do as much work, as you do the first
Okay.
time.
Well, the second emotion in your list of seven is anger. Duh. That's another major one, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So many people get stuck on anger because we have these expectations of how we want other people to be and show up in the world, and oftentimes they don't. And yeah, and we get stuck on anger. And so it's the same method, it's the same thing. You take a pause, you identify that you're feeling the anger, you feel it, and then you uncover the source of that anger. And, 9 times out of 10, you'll recognize, um, or maybe 99 times out of 100, you'll recognize whatever you're thinking, it's not true. It's not entirely
Well,
true.
there are changes in the body when we're angry. There are changes in the brain. There are changes in our whole hormonal system and so on. And we get kind of maybe adrenalized would be an appropriate word. So I think maybe because of all those bodily, physical cues, that maybe we can kind of get addicted to being in that state. Does that fit with your experience at all?
Absolutely. I believe that a lot of the way we live our lives are just by our patterns that we've developed over the years. And I think people who tend to be angry people um, have that habit of because their mind is just used to going there. Their mind is used to going to anger, and it's so the mind is it's familiar, to the
Uh-huh.
mind,
Sure.
and so they kind of by default, they go to anger, not by choice, but just by habit, they go to anger
Yeah.
because it just like works for them, like or they think it works for them. They think it's serving them, and it kind of it it makes them feel right. It makes them feel stronger. It makes them feel empowered, even though it's not really benefiting them. And so, yeah, I think that's the human behavior is a lot of it is by unconscious habits and historic patterns that we've developed over the
Yeah.
years. And this whole process of getting unstuck is actually learning how to recognize those patterns and recognize those habits that we go into by default and kind of chart new waters and create new ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And the third one is aversion, which I don't, it surprised me a little bit. I don't necessarily think of aversion as an emotion, although I'm sure there is an emotion in there somewhere. Tell us about
Mm,
your experience of
right.
aversion and how it made it on this list.
Yeah. So every emotion in that chart, I know the listeners are they can't see the chart, but every emotion in the chart, there's a box right next to it that has related emotions. So
Uh-huh.
aversion is basically something that you don't like. There's a situation that you show up to something and you feel it's like distasteful. You don't like it. Um, it's I remember going to services to prayer services a few years ago, and I'm Jewish and we're in Israel, and the tune it was December time, and the tune that they were singing to a prayer, to a Hebrew prayer, was Jingle Bells. And I remember like getting stuck on a version, like, ugh, like why
That
are
was,
they singing Jingle
yeah,
Bell? Why are they singing that tune in a synagogue in December?
yeah,
We're not celebrating Christmas. I
right.
remember being so stuck on a version that I just wanted to leave. Like I was so uncomfortable with hearing that. So that's an example. And of course I got myself through the stuckness that I didn't leave. I sat there and I got myself unstuck.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. That would be kind of shocking to experience, and maybe a sense of judgment about it. Like it's inappropriate. Why are they doing this? It
Yeah.
seems sacrilegious or something, right?
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Number four is pride.
Mhm. Yeah. So this one I get stuck on a lot.
Yeah.
um, with my husband. This is basically when unconsciously you just believe that you are kind of holier than thou.
Uh,
You feel like your way is the right way. Everybody should be seeing your situation, the way that you're seeing it. And if you can't see that there's other possibilities, you get stuck you know, in your own pride.
Years
So,
ago, one of my uh, faculty colleagues told me in a group retreat that we were having and so on, that I was sanctimonious. Now you can tell I'm still thinking about that. That was
mm,
years and years ago. So
mhm.
he kind of nailed me on that, and and the fact that I'm still thinking about it, clearly it must have fit. to some
Aha.
degree.
Yeah.
It fit. I shouldn't I shouldn't soften it. It fit, you know. I real okay. I do have this sanctimonious possibility. Uh,
Mhm.
and I don't know that I would have identified that as pride, but I guess I would have to have my own list. And
Mhm.
sanctimonious could be one. I can just try to justify it a little bit. My grandmother was a minister, kind of a holy roller minister, right? So, as a representative of God, you know, I might have picked up some of that.
Aha.
Okay. And then gloom. Wow,
Glue.
that's number 5. Gloom.
Mhm.
Talk to us about gloom, but don't persuade us
Yes.
too much.
So right. So this is, getting stuck on, loneliness or sadness or depression or
Mhm.
pity or um and I think that's something that's really familiar also to many people.
Yeah.
Maybe pointing the finger at other people for the way that you're feeling. So, yeah, I think that's pretty prevalent. I think most people would I'd be able to identify with knowing what it feels like to be stuck on, you know, feeling powerless or, hopeless or depressed.
Well, as an older male, I'm noticing that the drift, the pull toward becoming, quotes, the grumpy old man archetype. And
Mhm.
get off my lawn.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
really easy to get there.
Yeah.
Stop parking your car in front of my house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
big deal, right? But
Right.
getting
It
into that mode, I have to say, it's something that I have to watch out for and try to stir myself, uh, stir these old bones to get out of that mode.
yeah. Yeah, it's all about that awareness and recognizing where you can take responsibility for your own emotional well-being rather
Mhm.
than trying to change somebody else.
Yeah, yeah. Number 6 is desire.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the strongest emotions. I think fear and desire are probably the strongest ones that I see, at least within me. And desire is it's basically this, wanting of reality to be different, whatever reality is. So,
Uh-huh.
I'm stuck on, wanting her to apologize to me, right? She's not apologizing, but I'm so stuck on wanting her to apologize because I believe that if she apologizes, I'm going to feel better. And if she doesn't apologize, I won't feel better. So it's this, desire for something to be different that just doesn't exist. And I think that's really a strong emotion that most people have when they're stuck, and they probably don't recognize it.
I think desire is sort of one of the pillars of Buddhism in a way, is being aware of attachment and how attachment traps us. And, so desire would definitely be one aspect of that.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Being really attached to the world, to the outer world, and wanting it for ourselves, and that pulling us off from our true nature and from seeing how things are in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this method really beautifully aligns with Buddhism. If somebody is a Buddhist, and they're listening
Yeah,
to this, this is, you know, Buddhism is all about, attaching to a thought. And because you're attaching to the thought, that's what's causing your suffering. And the way out is really recognizing that the cause of your suffering is that attachment. And if you
yeah,
can recognize
yeah.
that that's the attachment or the cause of that suffering is coming from within you, then you have the power, to do something about it. And that's more or less what the stuck method is.
Yeah, well put. Now, the seventh and last one in your list is a little surprising. Joy. Really? You can get
Mm,
stuck on joy? Is that a bad thing?
I know. So many people, they say, can you get stuck on a positive emotion? So first of all, I don't even believe in positive and negative emotions. I think emotions, they don't They just are, I believe in, difficult emotions or maybe easier emotions, but I don't necessarily believe in like a positive or a negative. Um, but so joy is kind of like the kind of like the obsession of or the overexcitement of being in a quote unquote positive emotion. So, someone who's getting married and they're like they're so stuck on joy and excitement that their entire world is about all the details of the wedding and the dress and the flowers and the videographer and the band. Like that's all they talk about, and they're like obsessed
Yes.
with it, and like
Yes.
that's all they talk about. And it's like
Yes. Yeah.
they're so clouded inside their story that they don't recognize like life around them is going on. There's other people around them. Some people are, suffering or being hurt, or but they don't see that because they're so stuck in their quote unquote, joy or excitement.
Yeah, somehow that's triggering something for me that I'm having difficulty quite remembering. But is there something about stress and positive emotion being a potential stressor? Does that ring any bells for you?
S- So ask it one more time. Is
I just feel like there's something in what I've read and what I supposedly know
mhm,
that uh, that something akin to joy can be a stressor. There's
mhm,
certain major, like moving is a stressor, and
mhm.
getting losing your job is a stressor.
Right. Right. So there's this concept called stress, which everybody knows, but there's this
Yeah,
other concept called eustress, not so EU
yeah,
and then the word
right.
stress. And eustress is a quote unquote positive stress, like getting married. It's like
Good
the
point.
most exciting thing in the world, and yet that's stressful, or moving to a new country. That is so exciting. You're going on a new adventure. That's like amazing.
Mm.
And yet that comes with a lot of stress and a lot of opportunities to get stuck.
Maybe that's what I was thinking of. Thank you.
Mhm.
You bailed me out there.
Yeah.
Um, so, how did you decide on these particular emotions? I would think that somebody else might have come up with a different list.
That's a great question. So I only came up with them as I was writing the book, and I had to
Yeah.
figure out how to take these stories and how to put them in a book. Do I just throw 100 stories, into a book, or do I categorize them? And so I went through the stories one by one by one, and I took out the major emotion that I was feeling, and from that process I created this chart. It was pretty it was pretty like actually easy to do. It was pretty like,
Yeah.
okay, that's anger, that's desire, it was pretty obvious, but it was definitely a process. Like I had to kind of go through each story one by one.
Yeah. I don't know if you do this in your workshop or even in the book. I didn't see this. Uh, but an activity could be to ask people to make their own list and then share it in the group.
Yeah, so when I do workshops or speaking engagements, I have each person bring to mind a recent stuck spot or a stuck spot that they're in right now. And
Hmm.
that's why the workshop takes a little bit of time, because I give them time to go through each step so that they can really experience the feeling and the process and the result of getting unstuck. So yeah, when we get to this T step, they can look at the chart of emotions, or they can write out their own emotions. I just created that chart because oftentimes we will say an emotion that we're feeling, but it's not really distinct. It's not like we don't get like to the heart. We'll say like I'm stressed. How many of us so
Yeah.
many times a day will say I'm stressed, but there are so many more um, there our vocabulary is rich, and in order to really understand what we are feeling in the body, we really need to identify like the exact emotion. Like, is it stress, or is it hopelessness?
Yeah.
Because once we recognize that emotion, we're going to really be able to uncover better the thought that created that emotion.
Hmm. Well, I wonder, I know it came out of your stories, but I wonder if there were places where there were emotions that you considered and that you then said, nah, that's not a good fit, that you didn't put into the book.
Oh, emotions
Yeah, some
that didn't
didn't.
go into
Yeah,
the chart, you mean?
yeah. What were there emotions that, that didn't make the grade?
Mhm.
I think
Yeah,
you
not
kind
that
of
I
just
can
gave us an example when you were talking about stress.
yeah, not that I can think of. I think I put in, like, at least the major emotions that I experience or that I think most people
Uh-huh.
experience. I really tried my best to get those major, and related emotions into that chart.
Yeah. Now, do I understand that you are doing some work as a personal development coach?
Mhm. Yeah, I work as a coach one-on-one with people. My passion right now is I'm actually running a group program, which is a 6-month program I call The Journey,
Oh,
and it's quite amazing. Inside of this group, we have people who have all different kinds of stuck situations. It's not a stuck, it's not a group program specifically for, you know, mothers working with, teenagers who are giving them problems. It's a group it's men and it's women and few people working on procrastination, stuck spots, and a few people working on relationship situations, another person working on a job situation. So it kind of runs the gamut. And yet, what brings us all together, what really unifies us, is that we're using this method and we're practicing the steps, one by one, to get unstuck. So, yeah, so I run
so
that
this is
program.
really an outgrowth of your book and of your work around stuck. So it's interesting. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, that is an outgrowth of it. And the Getting Unstuck podcast is an outgrowth of the book. And
Yeah.
also, I started training people in my method. And so that's also an
Okay.
outgrowth of this
Yeah. What's the name of your podcast, by the way?
Getting Unstuck.
Getting Unstuck. Okay, because people might be interested in checking that out. So I'm
Hmm.
glad we got that out there. Now, did you do any kind of training to become a coach, get certified somewhere or anything, or not?
Mm.
I
Yeah.
mean,
So
I know
my
you already have some professional credentials.
yeah. So the training, the tools that I developed were what I received from the studying of the psychology and working in occupational therapy and specifically working in group settings in a psychiatric hospital and really I mean the greatest experience or the greatest um, way I think the reason that I've become a successful coach is really from all the work that I'm doing on myself on a
Yes.
regular basis
Uh,
and from having a coach of my own and
ah,
seeing what it feels like to be coached, also using this method. So I think, both of those things really, really empowered me to be able to take this and do this work on my own.
the coach of your own, is that someone in Israel or someone in the U.S.?
She is in Israel. She's also
Okay.
American who happened to have landed in my community. So
Oh, lucky
it's a
you, huh?
blessing. Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any other books on the way? Or do you have some other book,
I
one or more
do.
books
I
fermenting inside?
I do. I have so many actually, but the next
Wow.
one I have in mind, I'm not going to share too much because it's still like in,
Sure.
formation in my mind, but it's basically like the next step. So when I went on my book tour and I read some of the stories from my book, one of the stories that I read was a story where I was at a dinner with my family and I had prepared the house and I prepared the food. I worked really hard all day and we sat down to eat and no one acknowledged me. No one acknowledged the house, the
Oh,
cleanliness of the
yeah.
house. No one acknowledged the food. No one acknowledged anything about it. And I was really stuck that nobody, my kids, my husband, like everybody should, all good husbands acknowledge their wives. I had all these beliefs as I was sitting
Yeah.
there. And the story went that I considered that I can acknowledge myself I can consider that and, and be okay. And I did. And what was interesting was almost every event that I went to, and I shared that same story, people were not happy with that ending. They said, wait a minute, but your kids should acknowledge you. And you should teach your kids and you should say something to your husband, and there's no problem doing that. And my response was, well, the first thing you need to do is take care of yourself. Because if I start yelling at them or saying you should acknowledge it, that's not going to be a good situation. So the first thing, the getting unstuck, is you taking personal responsibility for
Mhm.
your emotional well-being. But the truth of the matter is there is a second step. The second step could be, maybe I need to apologize. Maybe I need to make a request. Maybe I do want to say something, but like in a different tone. And so
Mhm.
this next book that I have in mind that I started writing, but it's just in the beginning, and I have another acronym, but I'm not going to share it right here. Is
Okay.
that like is what is is like preparing for that next step, like after you
Yeah.
get unstuck.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. And there's a question I've never asked anyone before, but I'd like to have you take a shot at it. For someone who's outside of psychology, outside of mental health fields, what would you say the most outrageous or surprising or shocking thing is in what you are advocating?
I think one of the most surprising things to me, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly, but this is what I'm hearing, is how popular this method has become, how accessible it's become, how widely used it's becoming. Both in academia, it's starting to be researched. I know psychologists and therapists are bringing this into their practices. I am so surprised because when created it, I created it for myself. I wasn't creating
Yeah.
it for the world. I was creating it for me. And
Uh-huh.
yet I get emails, I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but almost, multiple times a week from people around the world, both the layperson and the professional person, and they're using it, and I'm shocked by it. And they tell me, well, it's attractive. It's easy to remember. Everybody knows what it feels like to get stuck. It's a step-by-step process. It's based on, the pillars of mindfulness, CBT, and compassion therapy. And so that's what shocked me. Recently I opened up iTunes and I saw my podcast was under the what's hot category. And I was
Yeah.
like, wow, like like wow, and or people from Australia or a country I've never heard of, Mauritius, or Arab countries, like right next to me, right next door to me, and they're contacting me and they're saying, thank you, thank you for helping me, like thank you so much. I wasn't raised with the tool. I don't know how to get unstuck, and now you're speaking my language and you're helping me, and I listen to your stories every time, and you're not teaching down and you're not being didactic. You're just saying what happens to you, and that's helping me. And so I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that's what's like been surprising me over the last 2 to 3 years, is kind of like, it's only been like a mini explosion, but I feel like this thing is gonna explode a lot bigger. And
Oh, wonderful.
that is,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Wow. I'm glad I asked the question. And it really underscores uh, how powerful coming from your own experience is.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
That might be a good place for us to wrap it up, but I'm wondering if there's anything that we haven't said that you'd like to get out there.
Well, I think I'm not sure who your audience is. If it's basically, I'm assuming it's um, people in the helping profession,
It's
and I
all
guess
over the world. It's
it's
all over
all
the place.
it's all over
Yeah.
the world. But would you say that most people who are listening are in the helping profession? They're psychologists or therapists or people interested in getting into that field?
A lot of people are. A lot of people are just uh, people who are intellectually curious and
Hmm.
interested about psychology without
Yeah,
being professionals
yeah,
in it. Yeah.
yeah. And so I guess the last thing I would say is, especially for people who are in the helping profession, especially, the therapists, the psychologists, the counselors, um, if they wanted to learn more about this method, if they want to get trained in the method, like the first place to start is to learn how to self-coach yourself because it's so powerful of a method to be able to know that you can be independent without having someone else hold your hand. You could really do this yourself. And when you practice getting unstuck, you can really hold others in so much more compassion for when they
Mm,
get stuck because you recognize, well, yeah, I was there yesterday. I got stuck on anger
yeah.
with my husband yesterday. And there's this more of like this kind of understanding and kind of, human connection when you practice um, your own emotional well-being.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate the passion of your closing statement here and everything that you're doing. So, uh, Shira Gura, I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Rap Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really an honor to speak with you.